All right. Well, good evening again. I'm Ryan Fraser, and happy to be part of this motley crew called TNAPT. Enjoying very much the work and being associated with each of you. I have the honor tonight to present Dr. Jennifer Crenshaw. And I met Jennifer a couple of years ago, just with her work with TNAPT, and she served as the vice president for 2 terms. So I don't know how many conferences you all had to organize, but I'm relating to that, working with that, and appreciate very much Jennifer's her service to our organization. And over the last year, we've been very excited about the possibility of her presenting at our annual conference, and she graciously agreed to do so, to speak on a topic that she is well acquainted with, and that is moral injury. So I'm looking forward to that presentation tonight. Jennifer served as a full-time clinical staff member of the chaplain service at Tennessee Valley Healthcare System since 2008. In fact, her work right now at the VA is connected to Vanderbilt, and so technically she is an adjunct or associate professor there with the folks that are doing training through the VA. Jennifer's ordained in the United Church of Christ, is licensed in the state of Tennessee as a clinical pastoral therapist, and is board certified chaplain through NAVAC with an advanced certification for palliative care, which is really in her wheelhouse, and hospice care. So I don't want to take any more time away from Dr. Crenshaw. Thank you for saying yes and being here. Look forward to the presentation. Let's give a round of applause.
I'm grateful to bring this topic to you. I'm not necessarily grateful to be talking in front of folks. It makes me quite anxious. So for the next couple hours, you're all going to be in my Crenshaw clan. And I invite you at any time to do a couple things, to ask questions throughout. This is actually the first PowerPoint I have ever put together, and I have not seen it yet. So we'll see how it works. But I also will say I'm not terribly, I know enough technology to get me by, which means my phone was talking to me today. And if you all are on Facebook, you know how memories come up. And oddly enough, apparently 9 years ago, this weekend, I went to a conference on moral injury that was out of Soul Repair, which is out of Wright Divinity School, which was at the time being co-led by Rita Nakashima Brock and Joretta Marshall. And that was down in Alabama. So I would say I am not a subject matter expert on this. I would say you all are subject matter experts on this because a lot of moral injury is trauma work and grief work. So that said, I invite you at any time if you want to ask questions, or if you can't read the PowerPoint, I have some copied off. If you want a copy afterwards, I can mail it to you. But if you're having a hard time reading it or the font isn't good, feel free to get up. And the last thing that I will share is I also have books and copies, and sorry, I'm going to move. Hello to all of you who are not joining us. And James and Omarion, I'm really sorry because I would have used you to help in this conversation. So feel free if you want to correct me on the chat to put anything in. James is just finishing up a residency with us, and he is also a veteran. And Omarion did a CP residency with us several years ago at the VA. There's books over here You are welcome. They're just on my desk at work, so you're welcome to take them if they interest you. I know where to find you all, at least next year, so I can get them back. I'm not worried about it. There's lots of just handouts that are random that I just, to show you, there's a lot of information on moral injury. So you're welcome to take any of that if anything triggers you and or to find more information. And the last thing is there's kind of goodies if anyone wants. There's posters and there's wrist bracelets on suicide prevention, which is also something that lands in your lap. Are there any veterans here? Thank you. And I apologize because moral injury is not just veterans, but I'm going to use the term collectively, and most of it's going to come from the veteran population. Please feel corrective or to tell of your own story if there is something that touches on you. And thank you. The last thing is, this is just, again, random. If I ever talk, I bring sacredness to the spaces. Most of where I talk is in hospital space, and I do palliative care or hospice, so I make sterile environments sacred through word and beauty, but I particularly brought the cranes because they represent peace. That comes out of, if most of you know the story, it comes out of after the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And there was a young girl who was dying from cancer from being exposed, and they tried to make 1,000 cranes before she died, origami cranes. They did not make it, but it has become an international sign of peace. And you're welcome if you want to take one, or if you didn't get one because they all left, I will send you cranes. I have my sister make them for me. But the reason why I brought them is when I began working with veterans, and particularly when I worked in some of the early post-traumatic stress disorder groups, I said, I'm going to go into the community. What do you want me to share with people? And they said, there are two really important things to always share. One of them is that you come in peace, and one of them is let people know, particularly veterans, that they are not alone. I think that message goes with all of the people that you see each time too. And one of the things that I realized, hopefully as I have matured, I have realized that it isn't that people don't want to necessarily share their stories, it's that I don't always ask the right questions. So perhaps part of what this will do is let you know that someone may come in to your space and they won't come in saying, I have these injuries from my life story, but they will come in hoping that in partnership and in the sacred work you do, that you will help to not only reveal it, but then to be part of the reparative and healing piece. One of the last things that I do have up here that you're welcome to look at too, but it's a handbook for doing work with, if you did groups with moral injury. It's a psychoeducational group, but it does inventory in it, and it does, part of the thing is you can learn about moral injury, but the next piece is what do you do with it? So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about that. I want to bring in some other stories too, and part of what I want to do is share some of the people that I've gotten to meet. But I also will say, when I started to talk to some of my chaplains that I work with, and many of the chaplains that I work with are retired military chaplains, and they retired on a pretty high levels, and they were really excited that I was going to do this. So they wanted to give me stories too, and I, of course, always want to bring people in with me. So I'm going to share that, but I want to go to get us ready. So I'm going to do, as I said, this work is grief work and trauma work as well. So I want to get us started, and I'm going to use the book Strong Like Water to do some just breath work. I also have another book that I'm going to introduce to you if you all haven't, and I'm going to use some of this. It's The Hero Within, and Deborah Grassman is an incredible nurse. She worked at Bay Pines VA down in Florida for years doing hospice work. And then when she retired, she opened up Opus Peace, which is a whole, which you all can get on and do her work on that. But it's really taking the next steps into healing. So introduce her to you. We will get to her later, but I'm going to begin with just some breath work, just to get us quiet and to leave the business time of today, the eating time of today, and get us started. And I went back to one of those old things that we used back probably in the 80s. So I will open and end with this and stop each breath prayer with the sign of love. We're going to breathe with Psalm 99. So on the inhale, you can breathe into the Lord is a refuge to the oppressed. The Lord is a refuge for the oppressed. And you can exhale a stronghold in times of trouble. A stronghold in times of trouble. And I invite you to just do that to yourself once or twice, doing the inhale and the exhale. Inhale, the Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, and exhale, a stronghold in the times of trouble. Psalm 32, 1. Inhale, you are my hiding place. Exhale, you protect me from trouble. You surround me with songs of deliverance. Again, I invite you to inhale in. You are my hiding place. And exhale. You protect me from trouble. You surround me with songs of deliverance. And the last one comes to us from Psalm 91, verses 1 and 2. Inhale in. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. And exhale. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. And again, just take a moment to breathe deeply, inhaling on. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. And exhale. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. I bring to you a short part of a longer story that comes from Deborah Grassman. And she's talking about she's traveling at this time, and she comes across a veteran, and she kind of chases him down, and she wants to give him her book. She wants to give it to him, and she wants to talk to him. She sees that he's waiting for a plane. She wants to talk to him. She gives him her book, and she gives the book Stories of Hope and Healing for Veterans and Their Families. And she looks at him and she said, I wrote this book for you. I want you to have it. You wrote this book for me? I'm a Vietnam vet. No one's ever done anything for me, he said with sad guardedness. I know. I love Vietnam vets. You are the exact reason I wrote this book, she said to him sincerely. "You're really the author of this book?" he pressed. "I really am, sir." And he dropped his head, and then he fumbled in his pocket, producing a pen. "Then would you please autograph it for me? I never knew anyone who really cared about us." And that is a story that I hear often from our veterans, particularly our Vietnam veterans. And I'm going to play a teeny bit of music, not because it's a veteran music, it's actually a Michael Jackson, but I want you to hear the beat, and I want you to hear part of this song. Maybe.
Power on. Bluetooth mode. Connected.
Well, it decides what it wants to do. But it's this beating, drumming sense of, you can almost feel people, in a explosive kind of combat situations where it's like, nobody cares about us. And that is what we hear so often. No one stopped, no one wanted to hear our stories. We couldn't share them. And one of the things that happened with the Vietnam veterans was, one, when they came back, they didn't want to come into the VAs. So we actually have vet centers that were set up and specifically to do counseling for combat veterans. But the other piece was that they didn't know how to share their story. They were supposed to protect people. So that even meant protecting their families from them. And so many of them carried the stories, didn't know what to do, and kind of, you'll see a little bit of the history of this, but it wasn't until really fairly recently, I mean, it's where the timeline that we've all been doing this very heavily from the more therapeutic, and all of a sudden moral entry, and I thought, oh, this is our language being put together by people like Nakashima Brat. These are our people, and it makes sense. And it makes sense in my introduction to my the write-up for this conference. I shared what my chief says, which is one of the first casualties of combat is the loss of the faith of one's childhood. And so moral entry began to speak to us and the work we're doing, and that's why it also folds over with grief work and trauma work. So I wanted to share 2 or 3 of the folks that I'm training today, and then we'll get started in the PowerPoint. And the message, if the only message you take from today is, let people know you care about them. Let the stories have a place to be held and nurtured and embraced. Not always just saying thank you for your service, but let me sit with you and companion you through what you could not leave behind and you carry with you. So I want to share 3 people. 2 of them come from, well, all of them come from groups that I did. One comes from a Korea World War II group that I inherited from my former chief, Tom Phillips, that some of you might know because he did, that's how I met him, was doing counseling many years ago. And 2 are from a PTSD group that I did where the people were very, very close. And the first story, I'm involved in these stories, but only because that's the context to get them to you, because that's the way I learned about them. So the very first story is about a person named Moses who was in this group who was not terribly connected to me, but he was very engaged in this group of Vietnam veterans that he was in. And Moses is a created name, obviously. He had been in Vietnam and had had a very, very difficult time. And when he came back, he couldn't fit back into the civilian world. And so he went into the Coast Guard. And when he came back, he could not fit in the civilian world. And he really went into the wilderness and went a little bit feral. And when I knew him, he'd been engaged in this group, but he had long dreadlocks and only minimal conversation. And he had literally been in the woods, living off the land. And there was a very brave woman who became his wife, and she entered in and she kind of coaxed him out, and she got him to go to this group. And this group really was, if any of you have done groups, you probably witnessed, we just frame it and then we watch the care happen really between the people. And I've seen that in grief groups that I've been involved in, or particularly in this group. This group was very close and really probably survived because of the group. That hour and a half that they were together, they were not wanting to take their lives or anyone else's life, and they were in relationship. Moses was having a very hard time on the November 11th, which is Veterans Day. Do you all of you know why Veterans Day is November? It's the 11th day of the 11th month of the 11th hour when you're not your head's the armistice, right? Yes. So that's why Veterans Day is that. And for some veterans, it's really important, and they celebrate it. For some veterans, it's very difficult. And having it in the news or having a lot of attention to it is very difficult. It was very difficult for Moses. He went drinking and drinking and drinking, and then he went on a motorcycle, which was not a good combination. He ended up at Vanderbilt Trauma, in the Vanderbilt Trauma Unit. And part of why I want to share his story is that even though he had this wife, she knew that the people who knew him best were this group of guys that he met with, and they knew his wants, and she actually made them, 3 of them, power of attorney, because they would know the decision when to stop his life, and they would know all of his medical decisions, because they really knew his heart and soul. He was, I would say he had Native American spirituality, and that was really important to him. He also was part of a motorcycle group. That was really important to him. And where I come in a little bit of the story is it was end of December, and the men in the group called me and said, we're going to take him off life support. Can you get here? And I was in Michigan. And about every couple hours, I would get a call from them, and they'd say, "How close are you? We're gonna do this." So I made it, and I was there with another member of the group. And Michael, in the world of Nashville, talented artist, amazing person in the music industry, very, very capable. I've heard him lecture. He is very engaging, but in this group, his heart was open. He had been somebody who had studied to be a priest, went into Vietnam, lost his faith, he also went into spiritual, Native American spirituality. He met me, we went, we said our goodbyes to Moses. We left the room, and we were walking down Vanderbilt. This late December. It's about 9 o'clock at night. Where the hospital's right there. We're walking back towards the VA. For those of you who know that, you can visualize it. life flight goes overhead. That's a helicopter. Michael, who's been standing next to me, I've been engaging, flat on the ground, absolutely flat out. And when he stands up, he almost in robotic terms tells of this offense that happened in Vietnam, and he is there. He is literally there, and we are immobile on the sidewalk because he has to tell the story. He has to tell it in chronological order, and he is probably not terribly aware of my presence there, but he's aware life flight triggered him, the trauma of losing a friend triggered him, and you know, when he finished the story, we kept walking. And the next about 20 minutes before I even got home, Moses had died, and Michael was on the phone crying and really inconsolable. He had lost the place that had formed him. He'd lost the faith that had given him a construct. He had found a group. Moses had found a group. They had reconstructed who they could be in the world, but outside of the safety of that room, it was really difficult for them to understand how to be in the world. Second person, and I have these permissions to tell these stories, but the second person, again, I want to show you because these people, when they come into your office, they don't necessarily share these stories, but they're in their bodies, and we have to help get them out. So I was doing a group, and it was a mixed group of Vietnam veterans and more the OIF, the Operation Enduring Freedom. They keep changing the name of that, but the mix was not good. The Vietnam people felt like they really went to war, and these people did not. So it was not a cohesive group, but it was an inpatient group. So they would do 8 hours a day at the hospital, and then they went back to this hotel where they worked. And one, I don't know if any of you've been at the VA, but this was back when we were outside in a trailer, which subsequently doesn't exist. But the reason I'm sharing that is I had a very small office, and I was very proud of it because I feel like if I have things that maybe I can get somebody towards healing. So I have this very small space, and this guy knocks on my door, and he comes in, and he is pacing, and he is taking up all of the space. He's angry, he's pacing, he's agitated, and he said, you know, I tried to do this your way. I went into the chapel to talk to your God, and he is angry. And I was down on my knees, and I was screaming at your God, take this from me, take this from me. And it didn't work. It didn't work, so I decided I was going to go take it in my own hands. Now, he didn't know that I knew that he had just come out of the treatment center at our facility down in Murfreesboro. So he just spent 6 weeks in rehab for cocaine use. So I sort of knew where he was going, but he said, so I decided to take this into my own hands. So I went out on the street, and he went down to Dickerson Road, and he said, and I got my dealer, and he's telling me the story pacing, but he said, I was on the street talking to my dealer, so he's facing the dealer, and the dealer's facing the street. And he said, we're just about to get this deal, and I can almost feel relief coming. I can't do it any other way. And all of a sudden, the dealer just stops the deal, and he says no. And he's jonesing. I mean, he's going, please help me. And he shakes his head, and he points to him, and standing out in the street are 3 of the members who were from the Iraqi veterans, and they're standing there like this, and they're like, we're taking you back. Again, this brotherhood. My smart mouth said, you think God wasn't there, those are yours. Take you away, they're not even like you. But I apologize. And the last person I want to bring in was this, when I met him, he was elderly, because it was a World War II Korea veteran group, and rural, he was as rural as he could be, from Kentucky, from the hills of Kentucky, and he'd grown up very poor and went into the war, one, because that's what people did then, and two, because it got him out of really rural Kentucky. And he had to make a choice. There was an event happening, and he had to make a choice. And he made a choice to put this young man who had just had a son, 3 weeks old, into a foxhole with another person. And he put 2 other people that he thought could handle things better in the foxhole over here. And you can guess where the story goes. These people died. And 60 years after the fact, he would sit and cry, and he'd have to tell the whole story. And he could not forgive himself for the story, for the choice that he made. And words didn't impact him. His whole life had been shifted by this. He, by the time I met him, hadn't slept in the same bedroom with his wife for 40 years because he couldn't, because he relived this. He couldn't really care for his own son, and he would cry about that, but he couldn't, how could he have damaged a whole nother family, and he could have this job. I mean, his whole life had been impacted by a decision he made, and he was probably 20 years old at that. And he was in charge to get everybody out and to complete the mission. One of the things that you may also hear if you're working with veterans is, particularly Vietnam veterans, but they'll say, I could live over there, I could be in country, it was coming back over here and trying to fit back in. And some of it is there was a lot of responsibility that doesn't translate over. Some of the skills that made them really good soldiers doesn't translate over into our community. And some of it is when you're carrying those types of stories, it's really hard to build relationship and let go of things. So we will get into this, and again, please stop and ask questions. But the other thing is, I'm going to try to stop us at about 7:45 because I have an activity that I'd like you all to do. And I think for that, if we can, we're going to move back where we ate so that you can have eating groups, but also have a hard table. Okay. Thanks. We're gonna. This is really just giving you an image. This was, I am seeing a woman who is military sexual trauma and got to me through the suicide hotline, and she shared this photo with me, and I thought, because she said, this is what we feel like. This is what we feel like. For her, every day is a decision not to drive to the bridge. Is her image of attempted suicide. And she says, I'm impulsive. I won't plan it out. It will just be when the day feels too overwhelming and there's no one to reach me. Okay, thank you. Most of you may know this picture or have seen it. You may or may not remember, but anyone want to say what you see?
Beautiful lady.
A beautiful lady?
With a hat on.
With a hat on and a
Feather.
feather. Thank you. You all see that? Does anyone see anything else in that? The older woman? Yeah. I've always heard it as the crone, and since I am in crone age, I always see the crone first. But yeah, so there's two images. And that's really, again, a reminder of us. So these are the lips on the old one here. Yeah. It's a reminder that who comes and sits with us may look very different, as we begin to hear their story. So the invitation is, let's be able to see all of an individual. You all know this. This is what you all teach and talk about, but this is telling us what morals are. Relating to or concerned with the principles or rules of right conduct or the distinction between right or wrong, personal ethics, ideas and behaviors shaped from family of origin, practices, religion, spirituality, and societal shaping. One of the things that has happened to me, because I've spent most of my adult working life, and certainly my ordained life, working in the healthcare system. And people always think that chaplains must be ethical and have morals. And so we get put on all these, we get put on committees, and we have to live it out because people are looking at us to do these things and to do them well. Okay. So moral injury is relatively a new field, and because of that, it's still evolving, it's still fluid. Again, there are lots of materials on moral injury, and I invite you to look at them. And if anyone wants to take a documentary, particularly if you're thinking of possibly doing it in your faith areas or doing a seminar, there's a really good documentary called Almost Sunrise. And it's not specific on moral injury, but it is specific on a journey of two veterans coming back, and they tell their story and they talk through what really helped them with healing. They take a walking trip from Milwaukee to California. Wow. And people join them on the way. It's very interesting. Okay, next. So what is moral injury? In traumatic or unusually stressful circumstances, people may perpetrate, fail to prevent, or witness events that contradict deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. Those are the authors, those are the foundational authors, and so most people who are doing work continue to refer back to them, and you'll see more of that in the beginning slides here. When someone does something that goes against their beliefs, this is often referred to as an act of commission. And when they fail to do something in line with their beliefs, that's often referred to as an act of omission. Individuals may also experience betrayal from leadership, others in positions of power, or peers that can result in adverse outcomes. That comes from Shea, and we'll see more of that too, but he's awesome. All of these folks have done the initial work on this. Moral injury is the distressing psychological, behavioral, social, and sometimes spiritual aftermath of exposure to such events. A moral injury can occur in response to acting or witnessing behaviors that go against an individual's values and moral beliefs. What is moral? The reality of war is that everyone gets wounded. Some wounds heal rapidly, but some last for a lifetime. That comes from a retired Major General, and the slide shows kind of fear. What is fear? Again, sometimes when you have these wounds that last a lifetime, fear or anger is what you present to the outside world because you don't know other ways to be. You don't know other language. You don't know how to manifest all that's going on inside of you. Edward Tick is one of the very earliest. He is the one who started to work with the VA. This is one of his more recent books called Soul Medicine, but he worked with Vietnam veterans and supported the Vet Center movement in the early days. He was treating combat trauma before the term PTSD came into use. He used post-trauma soul distress. It's much prettier sounding because it really gets to it, what's going on. I was talking about Dr. Jonathan Shea. So this is in 1994, which really is, if you think about how long we've been doing this work, it's right about the same time with some of us. Moral injury is a betrayal of what is right by someone who holds legitimate authority in a high-stakes situation. So what I have on the other side, and you all may not be able to see this, I was going to play a bit, but I'm not sure it's going to show up there, is Pete Seeger's song. Some of you may know this. It's Waist Deep in the Big Muddy, and the Big Fool Says to Push On. This is a song. So I am the youngest of 4 children. My brother, who was born in 1953, had a draft number. So I grew up listening to a lot of the songs from the 60s, the folk songs, but also songs like this, Pete Seeger. And what it says is, we're in the money, and the big fool, the leader of the platoon says, keep moving, keep moving. And if you know the song, he ends up getting swallowed up by Big Muddy. But that goes back to someone who holds legitimate authority, the betrayal when they say to do something. And either you betray yourself by not stopping and saying this is wrong, or you are betrayed because your authority is taking you in a path that doesn't work. Again, I invite you to YouTube and listen to the song if you're a folk lover of folk music. Okay. This is another one of the early people, Dr. Brett Litz. It's an invisible epidemic. That's what I mean, that you are seeing folks with moral injury. Some may be combat, some may be military, but there's a lot, particularly, and we'll see this a little later, injury that came out of the time of COVID, injury that comes from our life stories. Harm caused by perpetrating, failing to prevent, witnessing, or learning about actions that violate deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. Thus, the key precondition for moral injury is an act of transgression, which shatters moral and ethical expectations that are rooted in religious or spiritual beliefs, or culture-based, organizational, and group-based rules about fairness, the value of life, and so forth. As I was speaking before about Dr. Rita Brock, she was the director of the Shea Moral Injury Center. Actually, she was the director of Bright Soul Repair. This is where I think she is now. And she says, we are born moral. Moral injury is not a disorder, but a profound war inside that comes from our humanity fighting our experience. Alleviating that suffering requires remembering our humanity and finding a sense of meaning and purpose that makes sense of our lives. It's pretty powerful. Isn't that what we all hope that we're doing with each person we encounter? Okay. Can we get this up? This is just okay. We'll see. Okay. This is a little, about 2 minutes with her.
Valley, Brooklyn, New York, alive. For most of his life, he was seeking a very different Jude, rooted in years of abuse, homelessness, and attempted suicide.
So I just simply took the gun, pointed it to my heart, and pulled the trigger at point range. It ricocheted all around my body and just destroyed my internal organs. It took a 6-hour surgery
from something called moral injury. Dr. Rita Brock is one of the leading experts on the subject.
PTSD is usually regarded as something based in fear, and moral injury is your conscience. You start to doubt your values, doubt your society.
Dr. Brock created a program through Volunteers of America called Resilient Strength Training, designed specifically for veterans. That was part of the first group, and now he helps lead it.
In war, there's the main issue of having to take a life. That's just devastating.
I lost a lot of friends.
The 5-day intensive program encourages veterans to share their traumatic experiences with other veterans through storytelling, writing, and art.
Titus in his first group told his own suicide attempt story. He said, I'm making a pledge today not to die by my own hand, and I'm inviting anybody who wants to join me to raise their hand, and all 5 of them.
There are weeks of follow-up after. So far, 95 veterans have participated.
No one has taken their life. No one has returned to drugs or alcoholism or anything of a self-destructive nature, not even I.
And so he sings to build resilience and help other vets build theirs.
Today is a wonderful day.
Deborah Alfaro, CBS News, Alexandria, Virginia.
This is from a chaplain who is working at another VA doing moral injury. And he says, action-based construct, seeing, witnessing, committing, acting, omitting, not acting. Betrayal-based construct, betrayal by leaders, betrayal by service members, betrayal by others. Moral agency, moral self-identity compromised, moral behavior compromised, damage to previous worldview, others' morals as compromised, loss of faith, religion, spirituality, fear of one's own toxicity. Where does it come from? Moral injurious events, the nature of war and combat, killing or harming others. When leaders have to make decisions that impact others. When medics are not able to care for all those who are harmed. Failing to perform a duty during a dangerous or traumatic event. Failing to report an event that violates rules or ethics. Engaging or witnessing acts of disproportionate violence, feeling nothing or exhilaration while causing harm or killing others. This also talks, and this may fit in more of some of the folks you may be seeing too. Who else has some of these events? Healthcare workers, COVID and healthcare, law enforcement, sexual trauma. It could be in the military, it could be childhood, it could be adult sexual trauma. Racial inequities, gender, sex, and sexual orientation. And I'll just share a very brief piece for me, COVID and healthcare. Myself and one other chaplain were the only ones who were seeing people during COVID, going into rooms in COVID, partly because I do palliative care and hospice, so it was really essential to communicate and get people seen. But I also, because, what I was saying earlier, I'm on a lot of our ethics committees, and so I was put on our scarce resource allocation committee, and that is probably what was the most difficult piece for me throughout all of COVID. And I remember I was on our search committee for our new pastor, and we were doing it on Zoom, and she was asking the 6 members of us, what was the hardest part about COVID? You know, our church had been closed down. And I just started crying when I realized how much of that I had carried with me. that we were put in, we as a very small group, were put in what we didn't have to do, but were willing and going to be preparing to do, was the source resource allocation, which is really the decision of who gets the resources that we have. That's a really difficult. Think about people who work at blood banks, and all of these other pieces are, you all have your own stories. And you'll carry it. Yeah, Chris, please.
So, one that I've become aware of is veterinarians have a very high rate of suicide, and part of that is due to the moral injury of having to make decisions to put animals down that are healthy because the owner asked for it, or knowing that an animal can be helped, but the owner can't afford the care that would help, or the owner refuses to pay for the care that would heal the animal. And so most veterinarians, get into the business because they love animals and they want to care for them, and they put in these terrible positions of having to make these choices about animals living and dying.
Thank you. I got into mastiff rescue because they were in kill shelters. And it almost felt like kind of the underground railroad going and getting the animals and getting them. But that's a wonderful example, and I knew that because Kristen asked me about getting some material to it. Yes?
So I wondered, as I was looking at this list, I was thinking about church hurt. And I'm a licensed counselor, and so I see and hear a lot of that. That's not the initial reason why people are coming in for services, but then you hear the stories, right? And so as I was looking at the list, I was like, church hurt could go as part of a moral injurious event because of things that transpire to individuals within the congregation of the church. So
Absolutely. That's why I am saying you all are doing this work. You're not necessarily doing the combat, but you all are doing this work, and it is grief work, and it is trauma work, and it is how do we do the repair work for the people that are coming to visit us. And some of it is just looking at new ways to ask the questions, or new language, or new tools that can translate over from a group of veterans that may not know and may not have the language, but they are in a system to people who are coming to you and they may not even have the language yet. Yes, sorry.
I was just, one of the questions that has kept coming up for me in this conversation is, why not moral injury? Especially around some of the COVID stuff, and how we have seen folks embodying this very entitled attitude. What are the dynamics that are going on that doesn't cause moral injury for those folks?
It's a fairly good question. So if we are building communities that are having these injurious events or ways of being, how then are we going to be in a place of healing so we can live in these communities? Because there are communities, and think about going in the grocery store, being judging of people who aren't masking, or you would put my child in danger by, all of that, we've just embedded into our being. Yeah. Greg, you had something?
I'm just wondering if, when you think about moral injurious events, if you could also put nations, national populations. If you think about the elected leaders doing these things, when we talk about the authority, and misusing or abusing authority realistically, and almost like upending the national ethic or the morality of the nation towards some sense of, undoing a system, or undoing a culture, or challenging, I just wonder, if we aren't dealing with that as a nation now. And if that's the case, almost everybody is really a participant in moral injury at this moment.
I would say that, but that's really global. I would say everyone who comes in the hospital should have a palliative care consult too, because you're not comfortable. We are not a comfortable society right now. We have, one of the things I think is we don't know who are, we've lost the expectation of who is going to safely be with us, companion us, lead us, which is sort of what you're saying. We are unsure of what's the next step.
We've lost any sense of trust,
We've lost a sense of trust.
which for our authority figures, which then leads us to being some more injury constantly.
And our faith, one of the things with COVID, going back kind of to what you said, is I think our faith groups were incredibly injured, and I don't know if they will be built in the same way. And that's all the faith groups. And not just because we isolated or we found other ways to streamline or something. Streamline, those of you who are out there streaming with us, we found ways to include you, but it's very different. It's a different understanding, and when we slip into easier ways, they are also more isolated ways. And when we are more isolated, we have more openness for the injury because we're not rubbing against others. We're not asked to behave well either. Okay, thank you.
But I want to say, but for some people, live streaming is an inclusion and not isolation.
Yeah, and I will say, this is always my coming back to my 95-year-old mother, who is very sharp, is very engaged in the world through Facebook and through TV and multimedia. She would tell you who laid on the Titans the other night. But
For those who travel differently in the world with wheels and other things, or are unable to have access to transportation, so it kind of
it's both and.
yes.
And it did, in some respects, not close all the doors on the faith communities. So, yes, thank you. This may be really, some of these slides are going to be hard to see, so I'm going to really share, but this is a moral injury conceptual model. And what it's saying is, on the far side, you have transgression and dissonance and conflict. Down here, you may have risk factors, shame and proneness. It keeps going. You have stable internal global attributions, which kind of gets back to what Greg was saying. Shame, guilt, and anxiety, withdrawal. Your protective factors up there that come down are belief in a just world, forgiving supports, self-esteem, failure to forgive, self-condemnation. That fits in with shame. Chronic intrusions, avoidance, numbing, self-harming, self-handicapping, demoralization. And again, if any of you want a hard copy of this, you can have it. This is just giving you some of the models that are being used to help in the education of this. Okay. This is another writer's Koenig's model of dynamics and moral injury. It's similar, but it's talking about the different event that happens, the transgression of one's moral code. We hear this so much, spiritual but not religious, spiritual and religious. Where does that fit in? Moral injury is the psychological. And then these are under it: guilt, shame, moral concerns, feeling betrayed, loss of trust, difficulty in forgiving, loss of meaning, purpose, self-condemnation. And some of these things, and you will maybe asking if you worked at all with post-traumatic stress, there is some overlap and there's some very separated. Can you bring this one down a little bit? Yeah, up there. So you can see moral injury in the religious realm is the religious struggles, loss of religious faith and hope. And then you have the clinical outcomes. So you have the PTSD symptoms, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, sleep problems, relationship problems, headaches, pain, physical disability, unemployment. One of the things that I will say that I've seen almost across the board with particular Vietnam veterans, sleep is horrific. Sleep is just horrible. Not just dreams, but sleep patterns in general. And one of the veterans told me it's because they were so hypervigilant in the nighttime, so they just, to sleep is really problematic. Okay, thank you. Next. This is another person's injury model, and again, it shows the events that happen, the moral injury or the inner conflict. These are very similar. This is the event that's causing it, then the reaction, guilt, shame, self-condemnation, betrayal, difficulty in forgiving, loss of faith, spiritual struggles, and then the mental health outcomes. Again, PTSD symptoms, depression, anxiety, substance abuse. Okay. So, impact of moral injury. Guilt, shame, anger, feelings of betrayal, moral concerns, religious struggles, loss of religious faith. I'm not trying to repeat this in the sense that it's just really, pounding it in because it's so, these are what people are bringing to us. Loss of hope, inability to forgive. We hear that from so many mouths. Loss of trust, loss of meaning and purpose, loss of the assumptive world, self-condemnation, self-sabotaging behavior.
Assumptive world.
Loss of the world the way you assumed it would be. Yeah.
You probably are aware, maybe you'll say this, but the reference of Fred Keene, theologian Fred Keene, Keene, wrote about his wife, and reflecting upon her experience, he talked about how Jesus on the cross said, "Father, forgive them," and so that even Jesus did not forgive out of his own self, but called upon the higher Holy One to do the forgiving. And for a multitude of people, that has been a way to forgive when the self cannot. And I just offer that.
Beautiful.
Fred Keene, and you can find it in the Faith Trust material. But to me, it's been really a grace word for a lot of people.
Thank you. Going to give a little reflection on moral injury and PTSD because PTSD certainly was heard about. And I will share from my own, I worked at Luton Mental Health, which in Nashville, many people work at Luton Mental Health, and I worked with sexually abused children. And so I was in the world of PTSD long before I got into the veteran world of PTSD. I liked his saying post-traumatic or post-trauma soul, but it's the reaction to trauma. So all of us could have an event that happens in front of us right now. That doesn't mean all of us will have the same reaction to it. But that's the awareness also. That's the same awareness with moral injury. You could have a classroom of veterinarians, and some of them are really experiencing these pieces, and some of them, for whatever reasons, are not. And it's not, they're cold or unable, it's that's not the reaction that's at least come to their surface. There's a great deal of overlap between moral injury and post-traumatic stress disorder. Both begin with an event that is often life-threatening or harmful to self or others, Guilt and shame are core features of moral injury and are also symptoms of PTSD. The betrayal and loss of trust that could be experienced with moral injury are also common features of PTSD. There's a lot of overlap. Okay. This is again giving what the National Center is saying about the differences with them. Okay. Assessing moral injury. There's a moral injury outcome scale. There's by Litz. There's the 20-item moral injury questionnaire. These are all accessible to you all if you're interested and or want to modify them. Assesses exposure and frequency of events. Service members may experience more, but some of them can certainly be modified to other events. There's a 9-item moral injury events scale. Again, asks war-related specific questions, and a 17-item expression of moral injury scale. And I have some of those over here. They ask about experiences of self and other directed moral emotions related to military experiences. All right, that is not showing up. That tells you the overlap. I'm going to read it for you, where the primary is. You've seen some of the other pieces. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So on the left, under PTSD, you see focus on fear-based responses, treatment on exposure, and reevaluation of cognition. The real overlapping is the avoidance and the re-experiencing of grief and loss. Grief and loss, trauma, are very essential in both of these. Then moral injury, you have a higher sense of alienation and purposelessness, and treatment addresses moral conflict and self-condemnation. Okay. Again, this is showing some of the what you'll witness. So PTSD is more fear-based, moral injury is more guilt or shame-based. So under the fear-based or PTSD, some of what you'll witness is the startle reflex, memory loss, fear, flashbacks, hypervigilance, avoidance, night sweats, lack of feeling. And simple things, we don't have these as much now, but like even the alarm clocks that used to have like the red numbers, some of those could be part of the startle reflection. Certainly pagers in hospitals, when we used to have those, can have a startle, and the startle could bring them either temporarily just out of self, or it can do something like what I shared with Michael, who ended up on the ground when he had a startle reaction. Moral injury, you'll see sorrow, grief, regret, shame, alienation, doubt, hopelessness, and then some of the overlap. Anger, nightmares, anxiety, insomnia, depression, avoidance, panic attacks, self-medication.
Now, is it self-medication, is that where addiction comes from? Because I take that it's not just necessarily medication, but maybe food, maybe alcohol.
Yes, self-soothing, more self-soothing, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anything that's going to take you out of self. So this is where it comes to us. Indispensable qualities for providers in moral injury work. Be non-judgmental, be non-anxious, be compassionate, patient with the struggle, transparent, engaging where they are in the moment. It's the work you all do. All right. Again, this comes from the National Center for PTSD. Researchers have hypothesized that trauma-focused PTSD treatment, such as prolonged exposure and cognitive process therapy, can be effective for patients with moral injury. These are really classic what's used in the VA and what's being trained in the VA. And again, for those of you who are watching what Vanderbilt is doing right now, the Divinity School has a DMin. They brought the DMin back. It's in chaplaincy, and it is combined with, it's a program I did a couple of years ago when it wasn't combined with a DMin, but it was, it's changed its name, but it's the integration of mental health and chaplains. And when I went through, we had 20 DOD or active duty chaplains and 20 VA chaplains in a 2-year. They're really pushing kind of for researching in the VA for chaplains, and they're really pushing more ACT, CPT, exposure, behavioral. The story I told you about the person who was trying to make the deal, what had happened in his PTSD that really triggered him is they were doing a exposure therapy out to a movie theater to kind of integrate them, and there was a trailer for a war movie, combat movie, and it just, he couldn't handle bringing himself back into himself. So a lot of these are really the methods that are used, a little bit more controlled than necessarily outpatient counseling. This is the chaplain's BHA directive. Spiritual resources gives meaning, purpose in life, hope, and connectedness to something greater than oneself. Spiritual resources may be religious or secular. These resources are what the patient finds personally meaningful and are greater than the veteran as an individual person. Spiritual resources strengthens the person to cope with adversity. These resources range from basic human ideals to specific values and beliefs, which can serve as major spiritual guides in life. Again, this is what you all, this is your bread and butter. This is how you live and breathe and work with people. For healing, veterans must embrace the inner experience of inner death and seek a new identity and a spiritual rebirth. This is Edward Tick, Dr. Tick, as he's evolving with his work with his early work with veterans to where he's going now. This is showing a Jewish view, soul repair. Moral injury as a sign of moral health. Terrible transition from combatant to citizen. Guilt being morally awake prompts action. Teshuva, repairing the wrong. Recognition of wrong. Remorse, desisting from sin. Restitution where possible. Confession, repair the wrong, then rejoin life.
There's the agentic shift.
Yeah, the agentic shift. I am not sure. I think it's taking agency, but I would need to make sure that that's accurate. Okay. And these are, again, these are different people who are starting to do, and this is the work that's being done. Different chaplains are taking things on, but it's all trying to do, what are we going to do? Naming moral injury, now what do we do to protect? So her trauma and recovery has safety, remembrance and mourning, and reconnection. This is 2 routes to trauma, which is terror of one's own vulnerability. We can minimize the likelihoods of negative events, and horror of one's own immortality.
Immorality.
Immorality. Tell what work I do, so everyone's always dying in my stuff. Thank you. Spiritual interventions for assessed injuries. Dialogue with a benevolent moral authority. Make amends. Reconnect with community. Reconnect with spirituality. Forgiveness therapy models, and I love what you brought in, Ivan. shade therapy models, work with Brene Brown, and working on you. One of the things too, again, I'll just say, is exposing yourself, just knowing the language someone, and exposing yourself so if you invite someone to tell you the story, that you're able to sit with the story. And you're also able to know when you're saturated. I will tell a story. I got called in one time on Veterans Day at about 1 in the morning, and there'd been a veteran again who'd just been sitting and watching everything. And the nurses didn't know what to do with him because he'd just been crying and crying and crying. And I sat with him for about 2 hours, and he told me stories, and then I said, I'm really sorry. I can't hear anything more. Are we at a safe place to stop? What do we need to do to stop so that you can sleep, so I can sleep? Because I was then carrying all these stories, and he needed to share them, but if I wasn't going to be there any longer, then I wasn't doing him any good either. So knowing your own and being able to kind of frame that with people. And also being aware that you can safely let people go, in between times. This just talks about, those of you who know Alcoholics Anonymous, there's so much verbiage about, taking a moral inventory, searching a fearless moral inventory of ourselves, and knowing it's a spiritual program. Healing is always a spiritual program. I'll go to the 12th step. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Again, that's what we want. Yep.
As an example, we had this a number of months ago of the man that you sat with for 2 hours, and you said to him, I can't go any further. I need your help. Essentially, you were saying, I need your help letting me go.
Well, yeah, and that isn't quite what I said, but go ahead. Thank you.
It strikes me that in many ways, you brought in the value of honesty and the need for everybody to be somebody who protects other people. And of course, soldiers are sent to protect, and they're deeply wounded, and for that protection, you gave them a different way of protecting them to calm down and let you go to sleep.
And what I was hoping to say to him is, these stories are really important, and I no longer can give them the importance because I was saturated. And so I wanted to kind of partner with him to really recognize how I wanted to hear him, and I no longer could. Yeah, and we both needed to sleep and end. Yeah. Thank you for that. I wanted to, I wanted to share very briefly on this, and I told you all that I was wanting to stop because I wanted to do an exercise. But this is an actual program that's being used, and it's actually been being used at our VA. I have 2 colleagues, one who's a chaplain and one who's a psychiatrist. And I wanted to read 1 or 2 just of the readings that they use with that. It's an interdisciplinary group therapy for moral injury, but it's very specific. It's got 12 sessions. It's what you do each session. But I wanted to just read some of the things that they hear. They start the very first thing. They have checklists on their exercises. They're very engaged and they're kind of committed to one another. But one of the very first things they read together is, it seems to me that before we set out on a journey to find reality, to find God, before we can act, before we can have any relationship with another, it is essential that as we begin to understand ourselves first. So right from the beginning, they're inviting a self-reflection. It has a very spiritual component to it, and the readings and the work is that I want to read one more. This is from Richard Rohr, and this comes in their second session, which is lamenting the losses, which as we know is part of healing. And he says, we dare not get rid of the pain before we have learned what it has to teach us. This pain is not forever. There is a light and you will see it. This isn't all there is. Trust. Don't try to rush through it. We can't leap over our grief work, nor can we skip over our despair work. We have to feel it. That means that in our life, we will have some blue days or dark days. Historic cultures saw grief as a time of incubation, transformation, and necessary hibernation. Yet this sacred space is the very space we avoid. When we avoid darkness, we avoid tension, spiritual creativity, and finally transformation. We avoid God, who works in the darkness. Where we are not in control, maybe that is the secret, relinquishing control. And again, these are pieces and ways to kind of open vulnerability so that the group can work together. And these are just showing where things are happening. You can move it. And then I have a bibliography, and again, I invite you, if you want copies of this, and this is where you all are, putting the pieces together, going from where it really looks almost impossible, or you can't even see where it is, to relieving in the pain. So what I want you to do, if you are willing and desirous, there's a program called the Syracuse, it's the Moral Injury Project in Syracuse. And what they have done is it's a writing project. In Nashville, we have a lot of music projects. And I have writings from folks that are in there. And I'd love you to take some time to sit and read some of the writings. And then I have puzzles. And I invite you to either color your own thoughts, your own therapeutic credo for working with people, or working with trauma, or working with grief, or anything that comes up from these stories, or anything that is part of the puzzle of the work you do. So I invite you, if you want to do that, you can do it in here, or you can make small groups if you want to share what you've done, or you can go in the other room where you can probably color more. Before we disperse though, I want to do a lesson. But I have pens and markers, I have puzzles, and I have lots of the people's stories. If the story, some of them are longer, if it is difficult for you, you don't have to finish it, but these are people's writings. These are people telling you. One of them is really fascinating to me because it tells about what their tattoos mean. And I will say sometimes I'm a little, I'm conscious of looking at people sometimes and thinking, why do you have all these tattoos? What are you saying about your body? And yet it tells the story of why it's important and what each one means. So I invite you to do that. I would like to bless our time together, and then I also want to open it up if there's questions or anything that you have to. So thank you. This blessing comes from, again, Deborah Grassman, and it's a blessing for clinicians. So I think it's pretty appropriate. And she says this, so I invite you to hear where you are. She asks that people close their eyes so they can get into the deeper part of themselves. That deeper part that connects you with peace. That place that connects you with love. That place beyond our material selves. To that place that generates vitality. Take a minute to think about all the patients and families you've cared for in your career. Think about all the patients and families you are caring for right now. Take a minute to acknowledge the difficulty of caring for some of these people. Silently acknowledge the struggle it sometimes requires to bring kindness to some people who may not be so kindly themselves. Acknowledge how lonely it sometimes feels, how tiring this work can be. Now take a deep breath and let your breath take you to that deeper place within you. That place where there is energy to love the unlovable, energy to touch the untouchable, to heal the unhealable. Acknowledge your need for this energy and your willingness to receive the vitalizing energy from this deeper place within. Now think about all the people and families that you have yet to care for at some point on their future journey. Thank them in advance for the privilege of serving them. In your heart, ask them to let you abide with them, to abide their heartaches and their hope, to abide their suffering. Acknowledge the ways in which you might let them down. Be willing to own that, not in a blaming way, but simply letting it be instructive. Acknowledge the ways in which you too are a wounded healer. In your heart, seek to be reformed by the wisdom of your patients and their families as they redeem their suffering. As you leave this space, may you go forth with a blessing. May each of you here today with a deeper sense of who you really are. May you gain a deeper sense of your connection with each other, with those you serve, and with your deeper self. May you have a deeper sense of purpose and greater understanding of your mission in life and in the agency where you provide care. May you have a profound sense of how important you are to your patients, their families, to one another, to your own families, and to this transcendent energy of this universe. And then mainly, I thank each of you for having a heart that is willing to suffer the brokenness of this world. Your footprints touch my soul, and I am healed by this. So I invite you to ask questions if you want, to take time in reading, to take time in creating your puzzle pieces, to take time in just letting all that you've absorbed be absorbed and be in relationship with one another to discuss this as well.
In terms of the moral injury, the woundedness, by somebody mentioned this earlier, of the moral injury of religious communities toward their members is not listed up there. And it is an ongoing destruction in the name of the holy. In many communities that claim to be the source of love and healing, and I think that it is so profoundly destructive to the core of it that, and I was struck by the Teshuvah talks about guilt, and when guilt, you can do things differently and make repair, but in shame, it goes to the self, and the shaming part that comes in the part of the religious or faith community or meaning-making communities that shame to the core of all type. It just seems like that feels like there's no way out. If the place of healing is the holy, and the holy and its representatives, however one is describing it, becomes the imposing force of pain, where does one go? And if a community has been the place of destruction, people you've known since childhood, where do you go? So anyway, that comes, I hear a lot of stories from that.
I think it's
And experienced it myself from, as an adult. It's like, really, you're gonna say that to me? I had a clergy person tell me, I can't say it, we're being live streamed, but anyway. Okay, I don't do things on TV, so there you go.
I am grateful that you bring that up. I think that's enormous, and I think David gave us some conversation about that last year. I think it'd also be amiss to say that as we're, one of the things that's coming more to light, although we passed, but from the BIPOC community, moral injury from all the time. I mean, it's part of the life story, it's part of the trauma of living in community with others. I've been reading, I've been doing a group with 3 other women, UCC clergy. We've been meeting weekly to read and to understand, because if we're going to be part of the faith community, part of healing, we need to know. And one of the things we started with was our own racial biography, for lack of a better way of saying that. I'm not saying it, but again, just being able to talk or say that, where so long that's not been kind of what the rest of people talk about. There's lots of places where there's just where our safe communities are not really safe, because we're not being close to it.
I'm one of the DBN students. I'm just learning that, developing my thought and my theory and everything. So it seems that when you said that moral injury is invisible epidemic, like in our nation, maybe 50% of people are experiencing this type of injury. So and I know you keep mentioning, but you're saying something particular that Vietnam, they're different than maybe the World War II or the veterans of our time. And I'm assuming it's because maybe the nation wasn't very receptive of that war. And so, and I'm thinking about how sometimes, you mentioned that how a whole nation can be on something. And so you think that sometimes a nation may, in a way, kind of gaslight like the citizens, you mentioned been African American, they're trying to erase critical race theory, it's, even though no one in here had slaves or no one in here was like that, it was if we can pretend this never happened, don't teach it in the books, then we can gaslight it, this never happened. So it's in a way, they were trying to quiet out critical race theory in a way, it's kind of soothing that moral injury that maybe people feel shame from their grandparents and great-grandparents, and so you feel maybe the Holocaust and slavery, sometimes if the nation condones something, some people who are in conservative circles may say, about abortion or something, or they say if the nation condones something, then all the moral injury of the citizens can feel a little more alleviated. So you think that in a sense it's kind of like a national gaslighting to deal with the moral injuries of the citizens?
Yes, loves that.
Yeah, you got a paper in there.
Too painful to really go to the depth of acknowledging it, so we'll gaslight or leave it where it's at, deny it. This is too painful as a community, as a nation. So deny it. It wasn't really that bad.
Inviting the stories, inviting community, inviting the healing. It's what you all are doing.
And naming.
Naming.
You said naming.
Yeah.
Pointing it out, calling it out.
Other questions, thoughts? I really do invite your creative side to come through, if you want to, or if you want to read the stories. They're stapled. There are all sorts of different ones that are here, and they come out of a project that's meant to be a healing project. It's part of telling the story. You're welcome to it, or I'm done.
Thank you for letting us be part of the Crenshaw clan.
It's been a delight. I usually call myself Crane because, like, if I'm doing something foolish, I'll say, oh, that's good. And then I say, because the Crenshaws are all good. Given it's 15 or 16 children, so they probably wouldn't even notice that there were more people. Okay, more than welcome.